welcome to Fermentality. I'm your host, Kat Pierce with Atlantic Brew Supply, and we're homebrewers talking homebrew and sharing fermentation. So the purpose of this podcast is actually because you and I did a collaboration brew together at your place using your setup and your brew house, and it actually ended up becoming so popular not only in Atlantic Brew Supply but also with the employees of our sister companies, ABS Commercial and Raleigh Brewing Company, that they were like, "Hey, Tex, why don't you come and brew this on the small batch system, on the pilot system?" So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
We've got the beer in front of us now, and we're going to do a vertical of the beer that was just tapped on at Raleigh Brewing Company, in addition to the can of the original brew that you and I did at your place. Yeah. So first, why don't you just tell us a little bit about this beer and what your thought process was on creating the recipe?
So with the release of all the thiolized yeasts that were out from Omega, I know they had already been out, probably about a year before I started getting into it, but I really wanted to know what is the craze behind all of this thiolized stuff. And so I was like, well, I would like to make a beer that is delicious, crushable, but I also want to incorporate the thiolized thing, and that's kind of why I wanted to do something with Atlantic Brew Supply, so that we could see for ourselves firsthand what these thiolized yeasts do. And so with that, I kind of did a deep dive into some of the history with how it came about, and why is it being used, and what is it being used for. And so there's a myriad of things that go into beer that do have thiolized precursors. A lot of those are released during fermentation, things like when you do dry hops.
Right.
And so even the malts have some things, but some things aren't very perceptible to our olfactory senses. And so one of the things that happened was Omega found some of the genes that were in a particular yeast strain that would help accentuate some of those precursors, those bound thiols that we can't readily detect, and can release them. But there are certain steps that you need to go through in order for those yeasts to take effect. One of them being mashing hops. So why do we mash hops in some of the beers that we want to thiolize? Well, some of those characters have those precursors. We mash it because it releases those pre-thiolized compounds within that specific temperature range that's in a mash. So you're going to release those compounds while it's mashing, but at the same time, you're not going to get the bitters from it, at least not very much, because it's not hot enough to isomerize the alpha acids that are in the hops. And so you're extracting the aroma and flavonoid compounds that are in the hops that can be amplified by the yeast once it's transferred after post-boil. And so that's where the thiolized yeast strains come from. Not every hops has some of those bound precursors. There's only a certain variety that have been found. Some things like Saz, Cascade, Calypso. There's a few others to name, but there's roughly around 7 to 9 different hop varieties they found that works really well when you mash.
For me, that's just like very surprising, knowing what the flavor compounds of thiols are. So like thiols are these, precursors that essentially allow for massive aroma and or flavor of like a Sauvignon Blanc grape or
Correct.
Tropical.
Yep.
And so for me, thinking about like Sauvignon Blanc and where those grapes come from, New Zealand and everything, I would have thought that, the hops that come from New Zealand, like Nelson Sauvin, would have, obviously, I thought those would have been the only ones. So to hear that like Cascade and some of the others that you listed already also have those precursors, that just blows my mind, because the immediate thing that I think of when I think of Cascade is pine, right? So that just blew my mind.
Yeah. So a lot of these things, like Nelson Sauvin, is not one that has the thiolized precursors.
It just already tastes,
because
like it.
Those are unbound. And so those can already readily express themselves in the products that we put them in. So you don't really necessarily need any of the thiolized yeast strains to take advantage of some of those compounds. Even malts also have thiols in them that can be expressed and amplified when you use some of these yeast strains.
Awesome. So with this particular beer, what is the style that we decided to do?
So what we did was an India Pale Lager. The idea, though, we wanted to do a cold IPA. So there's a lot of back and forth between what's the difference between a cold IPA and an India Pale Lager. India Pale Lager is literally basically your IPA recipe, and it's lagered. Instead of using an ale yeast, you're going to ferment it colder to suppress some of the other esters that are expressed with ale type of yeast strains. On the other hand, you have a cold IPA, which is basically a lager recipe, really simple: Pilsner, some rice, maybe some corn, and color if you want, but you want to keep it really, really simple, because the idea behind a cold IPA is you really want to express the hops. You want to showcase some of those hops. And the way some people do it is they might do something that's a cross between a lager and a West Coast. So cold IPAs will tend to be a little bit more hop forward, even on the bitterness, but it's really crisp, clean, and refreshing. That said, you can use an ale yeast on a cold IPA, but you want to ferment it on its absolute lowest range of temperature, because you want to suppress some of those yeasty compounds or esters that are produced during the fermentation process. Alternatively, you can also use a lager yeast strain, but people will also tend to ferment it a little bit on the warmer side rather than at its lowest range, because you do want to get a little bit of expression from it. But the idea is you want a really clean canvas background and really showcase your hops. And so you get crisp, clean, refreshing, yet hoppy at the same time. And that's why some people might think that that's an India Pale Lager. And that's not really the case, because an India Pale Lager is a little bit more malt forward. So that's the difference between them. So What we did here on these particular beers, this is a India Pale Lager, because it's basically an IPA recipe that you would typically make when you're making the ale version of it.
Awesome. So we did a mixture of two yeasts. Tell us a little bit about that and why we did that.
That's correct. So in doing this, at the same time of making the India Pale Lager, I wanted to also take advantage of some of the thiolizing that you find in many of the other beers. I hadn't seen anybody doing any thiolized lagers. You see it in the ales, IPAs all the time. But I wanted to do a lager. One of the things we did was, rather than use just all Lunar Crush, which is the lager version of the thiolized, is we also co-pitched with 3470. We let 3470 be the workhorse of the fermentation, and at the same time we co-pitched with the Lunar Crush because we wanted the utility of the Lunar Crush, but not really be expressive of what its particular yeasts create during the fermentation process. We just wanted the utility of the thiolizing. So in making this beer, we actually did mash Cascade.
Right.
And then after that, we did, of course, your standard Whirlpool. There was hardly any bitter additions at all. We really didn't want this to be crazy bitter. And so with that, no dry hops were added because we wanted those thiolized compounds to shine.
Yeah, I remember even just after we finished up the mash, or as we were adding the hop mash addition, it just came across as like super melony.
Oh, yeah.
And it was super floral and wonderful. So did we use anything other than Cascade?
Yes. So during the Whirlpool, we used an Idaho 7 and Eclipse and Vic Secret. A lot of those went into the Whirlpool edition, and that's what gave it a lot of the aroma, helped elevate it. But then during the fermentation, you could really pick up on the nose guava, passion fruit, a little bit of grapefruit as well. was being really expressive during the fermentation process.
Excellent. So we ended up canning this beer, or you ended up canning it because, I wasn't there for canning day.
Right.
And you brought it to the homebrew store and essentially told everyone that was around, like all of the coworkers and everything, hey, man, here's your can. Take it home, enjoy it. Tell me what you think.
Well, it was a collab with Atlantic Brew Supply. So
for sure.
Basically a collab with Sea Turtle Holdings.
Yeah.
And so being a collab, sure, I brought a case up for everybody to have and be a part of that particular beer that was made in conjunction with Atlantic Brew Supply.
Yeah, so eventually I think we handed it off to our head brewer, Anita, and also the general manager of Raleigh Brewing, Aaron Strickland. They were both like super excited about this beer, and we decided to do a 3-barrel batch of it.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about the 3-barrel batch days. I feel like we were both running around like chickens with their head cut off.
Well, yeah, it's the first time that I had my hands on that 3-barrel system. So yeah, it was a little intimidating. But overall, it's the same process as I do at home, same number of vessels and everything. It was just trying to wrap my head around 500 different valves.
Yeah, thankfully we had Amber Rosado, one of the brewers at Raleigh Brewing, to oversee the entire brew transferring. But that was super cool. And now we have this beer on tap at Raleigh Brewing.
Exciting. Yeah.
So this is the first time in a hot minute that a beer coming from a recipe made by an Atlantic Brew Supply employee has been put on tap at RBC.
Yep.
So what is the name of this beer so that way our listeners can try and grab it?
Star Party Soiree. But if you just ask for the Star Party, they know what to get for you. So, yeah, just go for that one.
Excellent. Well, one of my other questions for you was, what equipment specifically do you have at home? Like, what is it that you're brewing on?
So my brew house is 80-liter, 20-gallon SS Brewtech, hot liquor tank, mash tun, and kettle. A couple of pumps that drive both sides. And on my cold side, I have 3 SS Brewtech unitanks, all half barrel, and that is all chilled with a Penguin glycol chiller.
What did you start out with when you first started homebrewing?
A 5-gallon pot from McAllister's that they made tea with. That was my first vessel, and I started out doing extract brewing, just like almost every other home brewer does.
Awesome. So when did you decide to make the switch from extract over to all grain?
Once I got my hands on a half-barrel keg that was converted to a keggle, I actually started doing brewing a bag, so that's basically all grain setup right there. So I would just heat up all my water that I needed for brewing in that one vessel, and then put in my bag and mash in, pull the bag out, and start up my boil.
Very cool. All righty. Well, we do have these 2 beers in front of us right now. So
Absolutely.
Are you down for a vertical?
Yeah, I'm down for a vertical.
So how old is the beer in the can?
So we did this one back around March or May, something like that.
Something like that, I think. Yeah.
It's been a minute.
It wasn't super hot outside at that point.
No, it was a great day out there.
So this beer or this IPA is a little old, but I mean, you do have a pretty sweet canning setup. So I anticipate the beer to have, especially considering it's been kept cold, I anticipate it to have held up pretty well.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the color, and
The
it's
colors-
almost practically the same.
Yeah, the colors are very similar.
Mm-hmm. And then the RBC one is just a little bit hazier, but it could be that we're at the bottom of that. Oh, yours
Wow.
actually looks really clear.
Yeah, so
I think I got the one closer to the bottom
we
of
got
the
the
keg.
condensation on the outside of the cup
Yeah,
too.
there
If
is
you
a little
wipe
bit of a
it,
chill haze.
so the from our can is a little bit more clear. But to be fair, that can has been sitting in the fridge cold for a hot minute,
Oh,
so
yeah,
it's
for
had
sure.
plenty of time
To drop
if
out.
if there was anything in there, it's dropped out.
Well, the can still has that really nice
Oh, yeah.
aroma to it. Definitely getting some of that grapefruit that you were chatting about, but I even get almost like lychee with it, or passion fruit.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Dare
still
I say
super.
even a little bit of melon and berry too.
Yeah, it's super floral for a beer of its age. The flavor is still pretty much there.
Yeah, that's great.
I will say it's mellowed out a little bit, but for the most part, it's kept up pretty well. I'm really impressed with how well the aroma specifically has kept. A little bit of oxidation, but that's to be expected.
I don't pick up on it, but again, my palate's not quite as atoned as yours.
I'm also okay. So it's funny. I was judging at the North Carolina Craft Brewers Cup this past weekend, and I am pretty much blind to diacetyl. Also, isovaleric is not something that I really pick up on unless it's like really bad. But I am super sensitive to oxidation. The thing about it is I'm looking at this beer. The color is still absolutely perfect. It shows no signs of oxidation whatsoever. All right, well, let's look into this RBC and do a comparison.
So I notice on the aroma, it's not quite as pronounced as the can. It's a little more subdued, but I do get the aroma still.
Oh, yeah. I would say I get more of that like papaya lychee on this one than I did the other one. But in the flavor, though, it's definitely still that like more grapefruity.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty darn close.
Yeah. I mean, this is also the benefit of doing a cold IPA or a pale ale. I mean, like the malt character is, so like low and crisp and easy drinking that it really does allow for those hops just to be the star of the show. Whereas
as far as I can tell on this, if I were drinking a pint of it at the bar and said, give me another one, and they poured the other version of it and then pass it off to me,
I don't know that I would have been able to tell the difference.
Mm-hmm. It's that similar.
Yeah. Very well done. Very well done. I'm also just absolutely in love with the label that you did for the homebrew version of it. It's holographic and it has astronauts on it dancing.
Yep.
And then on the arms, they've got little arm patches that show the Hot Manus logo and the Atlantic Brew Supply logo on it.
Right. Yeah.
And they're dancing in a galaxy. It's just so pretty.
Yeah. It was fun to do. I mean, I already had that basic label design already planned out, but I really wanted it to pop. And I said, if I did this as a holographic label to make the stars in the background just shine. And that was my idea behind the holographic version of it. And the astronauts in their suits are also really shine as well. It's really cool. But the whole idea was just to get the stars to sparkle.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, they definitely do sparkle.
Yes, they do.
It's very fancy. So what is one piece of equipment that you absolutely cannot live without?
Oh man, there's 3 in my brewery that I just absolutely can't live without. But the one that I have the most fun with, it's got to be my smart plugs for Alexa.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
that is a lot of fun.
I've got a lot of different things plugged into those, and I can control it all. And one of the things I like to do when I'm working in my home brewery is washing kegs while I'm doing other stuff. And so I have my keg washer plugged into Alexa. And I have a rule set up on it to where when I tell Alexa to turn on keg washer, it runs by itself, for a predetermined amount of time, and then just automatically cuts off when it's done. And so that way I can multitask and do other things and not sit there and say, oh man, my keg washer's been running for the past 37 minutes. And how many kegs can I get washed if I lose track of where I'm at on it? And so that's kind of fun. I don't even have to tell Alexa to turn it off because she does it for me already. And so I can control other things, my coolers, other pumps as well. So that's just been a really fun part of making my brewery one step closer to being a smart brewery.
Very nice. Very nice. I mean, that's actually a really big topic of conversation in the commercial industry is automation. So the fact that you're using Alexa for your automation is just awesome to me.
If they had smart plugs that were 220 already, then I would have had an electric panel that I could just wake up at first thing in the morning and say, Alexa, turn on HLT. And by the time I got out there after downing my first cup of coffee, my water would already be hot.
That would be amazing. Or just set it up on a tablet and then be able to like have the tablet in your like bedroom or whatever as you're getting dressed and
It's
everything.
just so much better to just tell Alexa to do it for you.
Yeah, true. All right. So you actually have won some awards, including a national award with the National Homebrew Competition that American Homebrewers Association runs. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so National Homebrew Competition in 2017, I won first place on round one with Kentucky Common. It was the first time that style was introduced to the 2017 or 15 guidelines, and everybody and their mama's uncle was trying to rush to make that recipe. You'd see brewers putting it out left and right, trying to be the first to have the best. And I was like, you know what, I want to try my hand at this. And so I probably brewed about a good half dozen to maybe 10 batches before I felt really confident in putting it forward. And I entered into the competition, and lo and behold, came back with a blue ribbon. So that was fun. Now, that said, I didn't advance on to round two because I was in the middle of moving, and I didn't get to produce a second batch to enter, so I had to drop out of the competition. But I feel pretty confident that I would have earned some hardware, maybe if not like gold or anything, but seeing how well it did in round one, I feel pretty confident that it would have placed pretty decent in round two. But I was kind of sad that happened, but hey, life
happens. Yeah, absolutely. Were you just at that point in time and moving to North Carolina?
No, I was already in Raleigh. I just we bought a house, and so that's a
pretty big deal.
It was time to move on, so we went ahead and had to get that, and all of my equipment was just put away, and I didn't have time to get a batch in before that happened.
Yeah, so you are actually a part of a local homebrew club, and recently you did a big brew day to get ready for entering into the quarterly brew off that Atlantic Brew Supply runs. Tell us about your homebrew club and a little bit about some of the things that you guys do together, including like big brew days.
So I like to hang out with the guys at Garner Ale Society. I'd been with Carboy for the longest time, but where I live now, it just didn't make sense to be a part of that club, seeing that they were so far away from me. It was really difficult to be able to attend the vast majority of their meetings. I still feel like some things were missing out of my life when I didn't get to join the meetings. And no, it wasn't just to hang out and get my free drunk on. So I miss the conversations and the camaraderie and the trading of recipes and, picking other people's brains on what to do, in a certain situation, or vice versa. Some people might ask me on some of the things that I run across. So with the quarterly brew offs that we're doing here at Atlantic Brew Supply, Garner Ale Society being close enough to me, I decided to go ahead and participate in that as part of their club. And so I've been hanging out with them probably since around maybe February or March, and really got to know the guys. And with the third quarterly brew off coming on, I decided to open up my place for everybody to come over and host a big brew day. And so everybody agreed, thought it'd be a great idea, and it was a whole lot of fun. We decided to do a fest beer, and that's everybody came. We brewed a large batch. Everybody took home a small share and pitched their own yeast. So we all got the same base wort, and they're going to pitch their own yeast and let it ferment and see how the different versions come out during the competition. So that was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, I obviously really enjoy Carboy. Garner Ale Society is also really cool. I try to go to all of the homebrew clubs in the local area, but Garner Ale Society is definitely a lot of fun. I mean, they definitely walk away with a lot of hardware at
yes, they do.
The quarterly brew off. So yeah, I mean, they've been kicking ass both the quarter one and quarter two, and with quarter three coming up, and seeing you guys brew that fest beer, I'm going, so this is why they win hardware.
Yes.
And you guys just do a really good job with picking each other's brains and, sharing information and knowledge and all of that. It's really impressive to see what you guys can do together as a team. So what was the biggest mistake or a big mistake that you have made in home brewing, and tell me what you learned from that mistake?
The biggest mistake is probably getting hammered while you're brewing. So I've done that a couple of times, and the last time that I did that cost me a lot of money. So I decided not to do that ever again. Things can go wrong. You can't multitask as much as you think you can when you've knocked back several beers while you're doing your production. Not only that, it could be dangerous. You could also injure yourself.
For sure.
There's a lot of hot water, hot liquid in there, and other things that are pressurized. And if you're
especially for a system like yours.
Yeah, if you're really not paying attention, you could really hurt yourself, other than losing money on a batch from ruining it, not doing some of the things that you should do. But that's probably been my biggest mistake. And so I've learned from that. I won't have a beer until at least knockout.
Yeah.
So by the time I'm wrapping up, the buzz hadn't kicked in yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, whenever I've watched you brew, like the day that we brewed the Star Party Soiree, you really work like a well-oiled machine. You have everything set up so that way you know exactly what your next step is, and you're always preparing for that next step, even if it's, just an hour down the line. Yep. Before you even get started on your mash, you've already got all your sanitizer buckets ready to go. And you know what? It's funny because we talked about a couple of things that you do in your home brewery that's very similar to what like commercial breweries have. The stupid squeegee. Like, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, the floor squeegee. Yeah, that's an indispensable part of the brewery as well.
I mean, just having the opportunity or having the tools available and necessary, you can tell that you've been doing it for a very long time.
Yeah.
And it was just amazing to sit there and watch you do it. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those situations where, yes, I absolutely do enjoy partaking in a few beverages while homebrewing. I would have to say that I also have made that mistake before where I've forgotten to do certain additions, or oh crap, I was supposed to do half an ounce of Cascade instead of a whole ounce of Cascade, or I didn't take the figs out of the freezer in time to puree this. That happened to me this past weekend.
Oh, goodness.
Thankfully, I didn't have to add the figs until like a couple of days later, but my friend was actually bringing the equipment to puree it correctly, and I forgot to take it out of the freezer until like an hour beforehand. So, quick trick on defrosting fruit that you've frozen.
Microwave.
No, I don't. I don't own a microwave.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I am a big believer. Just side note. I'm a big believer, and if it's easy enough for me to microwave, it's probably not something I should be eating. So we don't own a microwave. And then I got the air fryer, and all of that went out the window. Anyway, but the trick to defrosting fruit like figs or whatever that you have frozen is actually to turn on your oven to like the highest setting that it can go and just sit it on top of the oven.
Oh, okay.
So don't put it in there, but sit it on top and it'll like defrost it for you. Okay. Now that's assuming you don't have like a separate range from your, oven or whatever. But I have the old style. Yeah. And that definitely helps it to naturally come to temp. And also, actually, surprisingly enough, pureeing it while it was still slightly frozen actually helped with the process of it moving through. It wasn't like completely frozen like a rock,
right.
But it was still slightly like crystallized ice in there. Anyway, it helped. It was a lot easier to like take the stems off and all of that. So I think this was a happy accident. Call me Bob Ross. All right. What is a beer that you have made that you're especially proud of?
This particular Star Party, I'm really proud of. It was so well received that it was actually moved up to pro production, and so that's a fantastic move. Now I have done other beers. I have collaborated with other breweries before, but this was by far the most fun.
Yeah, I mean, it was one where you brought the actual product directly to the babe's mouth, right?
Yep.
And they tried it and they said, hell yeah, I want that on tap. This is fantastic. I mean, it was also really cool to see you and Anita working together on getting all of the ingredients together, talking about the recipe. And, one of the things that I really love about Anita as a head brewer is that, I mean, really just as a brewer as a whole, any brewer, anybody in beer, there's always more to learn. And there were certain things that you were learning from Anita, and there were certain things that Anita was learning from you. And just to see you guys both like collaborate with one another and be, super supportive of one another in this particular brew, that was really cool to see.
It was fun.
What advice do you have for folks interested in starting the homebrewing hobby?
If you're going to start, invest heavily on cold side.
Yeah.
It's always easy anybody can make oatmeal. Hot side is always easy, but if you really want your beers to turn out good, fermentation control is key. So yes, you will get beer in your closet or your bathtub and, in the spare bathroom and let it ferment at ambient. But if you really want to take control and be proud of the beers and not be turned off, right? Yeah. Fermentation control is key. So if anything, at least start off with a little mini fridge that you can pick up garage sales or Facebook Marketplace, places like that. You can get them so cheap. And fermentation control, temperature control is very easily done. So it only needs a few small pieces of equipment. It's a minor investment. But I do recommend if you're going to be spending money on hardware, start first on your cold side.
For sure. I mean, fermentation, the actual act of fermentation, once it's in your fermenting vessel, that's where all of the hard work starts in. I mean, yeah, you're sweating and you're nasty and whatever throughout the actual brew day, but when it comes down to actually making a good product, the fermentation side is where the magic happens.
Absolutely.
And you need to really highly focus on that side. Also, I mean, obviously sanitizing and all of that jazz, but I mean, that's on the cold side.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those situations where as soon as I bought my not fermentation vessel, but like my fermenting chamber, like my cold chamber, it was actually a old pharmaceutical fridge.
Oh yeah.
Set that already had the controllers in it and everything. The only thing about it is that I work on freedom units, so I have to figure out how to change from Celsius to Fahrenheit.
Okay. Yeah.
But
still,
I mean, once I got that, my entire game was changed.
Yeah.
I mean, I had the mash and boil and was doing really nice efficiency on the mash and boil as compared to like what I was doing before. I mean, the mash and boil or any like all-in-one electric system, you're going to have those, funky differences. But, I mean, I got that and I was ready to go and I was ready to make the next step on the cold side. I'm like, man, I should have done this eons ago.
Yeah.
So
in any brewery, the cellar man is actually the unsung hero.
Yeah. Dude, this is one of the things that I also have. I mean, I will be the first to admit I am a terrible cellarman. I am really bad about remembering when to do certain additions, when to take certain readings and all of that jazz. But the thing for me that I feel like most commercial breweries, when training their brewers, miss out on is training them first on cold side, because the cold side is the most important part, where that is going to determine whether or not your product is a good product. You can make all kinds of recipes, and sure, it may not like reach the BJCP style guidelines exactly, but the cold side is what's going to make it a good beer. So, all right. My last question for you, and this is my most favorite question. If you were a beer, what beer would you be?
IPAs.
IPAs, and why?
Because there's just so much flavor and character going on in the IPAs. I know a lot of people might like their malt forward beers, their stouts and porters, even just your pale ales. There's a lot of flavor going on in those, but you take the IPAs and combine those as well with the different things that hops can bring to the party. I really love all the combinations that IPAs bring forward. There's just so much going on. So
Absolutely.
as weak as my palate is, I need a lot to go on for me to really appreciate a beer.
Well, I can definitely appreciate that. IPAs for me, I used to be a massive hophead, and even now I can go back and I can, really appreciate something new that is being done with an IPA. Even if I am primarily a lager drinker now, or, a sour drinker to where the acetic acid is an enamel ripping, because I am in love with those sours. Awesome. Well, Tex, thank you so much for joining us on Fermentality. I really appreciate you spending the time to do a collab brew with me. And
it was a long drive from the counter to the chair, so
yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It was a fun commute.